Hey everybody, I'm Phil and this is GigaBrain Tech. And today we're going to be unboxing a pretty interesting product. This guy right here, the Minisforum BD790i SE Special Edition. It's an MODT ITX motherboard. MODT stands for Mobile on Desktop. Pretty interesting product. I'm excited to open it up and check out how it's different from some of the other desktop parts we see out there. Let's jump in. All right, let's do this. This is the BD790i SE, the special edition, and I believe that omits a couple of features from the regular BD790i, but we'll see those when we open it up. So taking a look at the back here, we've got some pretty interesting things. This uses a CPU that I didn't originally know about, the Ryzen 9 7940HX. So, you know, a common CPU is the 7940HS, which is an 8-core, 16-thread mobile chip with a TDP of 35 watts. The 7945HX is a very common 16-core, you know, kind of beefy gaming laptop CPU. So I didn't know that there was a 7940HX that was also 16 cores and 32 threads. I decided to buy this because I was educated on Reddit by somebody who said this was actually a 16-core chip, and then I looked closer and thought, wow, that's actually really, really awesome. So 7940HX, 16 cores, 32 threads, up to 5.2 gigahertz. So some interesting things we'll see inside the box are there's a customized heatsink. So you have to add a 120 millimeter fan to the heatsink that's already there. So that's pretty interesting as well. It does use SODIMM up to 5200 megahertz. And there are two PCIe 4.0 SSD slots, which is pretty nice. One thing I saw on the spec sheet for the non-special edition is that there is an SSD heatsink, and also that the slots are PCIe 5.0. So kind of an interesting difference there between the non-special edition and this one. One other cool thing that we'll find is that there is a PCIe 5.0 X16 slot for full-size GPUs, which, let's be honest, is pretty cool. Some other features, there's Ethernet, there's a couple ports. We'll take a look as we open it up here. So let's jump in. Let's knock this out here. Perfect. I'll leave this here for reference. Open up the box, kind of like a standard tech box here. Looks like we have some copyright info. It says appendix on it. Interesting. And then Minisforum Mini PC collateral guide. So this looks like a QR code to obtain the usage guide. No manual inside, but we're just going to have to wing it. Pulling it out. Looks like there's nothing else inside the box except for these little brackets we can take a look at after. And let's pull it out. Very nice. So first thoughts are the photos of the product online are definitely of the non-special edition, where there's a big SSD heatsink covering these two slots here. So this feels a little bit more bare bones in a sense, but still pretty cool. So let's take a look. We do have, this is a pretty hefty heatsink. We can take a look inside here. It looks like there's maybe 2 heat pipes that wrap around. Nope, actually it's 4 of them. So 2 on this side that come out here, and 2 on this side that come out on this side. So pretty cool. Pretty hefty aluminum heatsink here. I'm a fan, honestly. It feels like it's going to have some pretty solid cooling power. Taking a look at the ports, you can see there are a lot of fins here for exhaust, I assume, for the heatsink. So that's cool. Ports, we have our 2.5 gigabit LAN here. These 2 USB ports are USB 2.0, the spec sheet says. We do have mic, line out, line in. That's nice. There's a button here with a little arrow, some type of, maybe a CMOS reset button or something to that effect, but we'll have to see when we test it out. We are going to be using this in a review video and a comparison video against some desktop CPUs here, so that should be interesting as well. We do have a USB-C port. This is an alt display port, so can do video out. The spec sheet says that, and there is a small monitor icon here. We have display port. Doesn't say what type of display port that is. One HDMI port. We can look into that potentially and see if this is, you know, an HDMI 2.0 or 2.1. My guess is it's 2.1. But then we have 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports here. So these are going to be 5 gigabit USB ports. So not a ton of ports, but we do have, you know, 4 USB-A ports and the 1 USB-C port. So there's some expandability there if we need it.
Okay, could be worse.
So pretty cool on the ports. Looking at the power situation, we see there's one 8-pin PCIe cable here, I assume for CPU power. Then we have a traditional 24-pin ATX power connector for the rest of the motherboard. So pretty awesome there. There is a very small slot up here. I think this is an M.2 2230 perhaps for adding Wi-Fi. That does appear to be the case actually, because there are 2 cutouts here on the back where you'd have your Wi-Fi antenna poking out there. So pretty awesome. I'll have to see what it costs to add Wi-Fi to this unit. We'll probably use it with Ethernet most of the time, but it's nice that they leave that open for the user. So like the spec sheet says, these 2 slots are both PCIe 4.0. They are actually labeled here on the motherboard, 4.0, 2280 M.2 slots. It looks like we have some kind of quick release cables here, or buttons perhaps. We'll have to see how these are used. Doesn't look like they screw in, which is actually nice. So looking at some of the other headers on the board, this looks like a front audio header, and it is labeled as such here. There is a CPU fan header, which is, you know, just a standard 4-pin. There are 2 system fan headers here on the side. Here we have front panel connections, so, you know, power button, reset button, a hard drive light, etc., and a front USB 3.2 header here. It is labeled that way on the motherboard, which is cool. So you can see that the PCIe 5.0 X16 slot here is metal reinforced, which is a really nice touch, especially because GPUs are starting to get really, really big. So we like to see that as well. So taking a look here on the flip side, some of these small boards sometimes have PCIe M.2 slots on the back. This one doesn't. It does look like it has a battery here, and it seems like it's not too tall. It should probably fit just fine with some of the standoffs that you'll see in a case. Lastly, this motherboard does use SODIMM RAM, so laptop RAM. You can tell by the shortened slots. It is limited to 5200 megatransfers per second, which is, you know, not the fastest available out there, but also not the slowest, right? The slowest DDR5 spec is 4800 megatransfers per second. So I think, you know, it's possible that they could have configured this with a little bit faster RAM, but it's reasonable in my opinion. And then probably the coolest part is that under this heatsink, you know, pre-mounted, pre-soldered, is the Ryzen 9 7940HX. 16 cores, 32 threads, up to 5.2 gigahertz, Zen 4. A pretty powerful chip. I'm really excited to work with it, actually, and to compare it with some desktop chips here in the future. Okay, so that kind of wraps up what we see on the board itself here. Pretty interesting. Let's take a look at what came with. First, we have a longer screw here. I'm not exactly sure what this is for without looking at the manual. Perhaps these are, it's possible that these actually fit into the heatsink here, although we'll have to see when we try to set that up. But I'm actually going to leave this here because perhaps most interesting are these 2 brackets here. I believe this is how the 120 millimeter fan will get mounted to this board. So I'm not sure if they mount this way or how it works, but this is theoretically how we can affix a downdraft 120 millimeter fan on top of this fin array, so that heat then gets exhausted from the 2 sides of the fin array here. So that's very interesting. We've got some other screws here. These look like they are either part of the fin array or part of the fan mounting, or potentially an SSD. Same here, another very small, very short screws here. And then 2 extremely small screws here. Not sure what these are for. Maybe these can be used with the SSD mounts. But yeah, a variety of screws here that without the manual, it's hard to tell exactly where they're going to fit in. All right, so some of our future plans for this board involve outfitting it with a couple of parts that we have here. So we got a nice deal on a Scythe Wonder Snail 120 millimeter fan here to use to cool this CPU. So this is a really nice fan, up to 2400 RPM. Thank you, Prime Day. We'll also be pairing it with a Team Group MP44L, kind of a mid-range PCIe Gen 4 SSD without DRAM, but still pretty fast, up to 5,000 megabytes per second read speeds. And we have 64 gigabytes of dual channel DDR5 4800. So we might be able to get a little bit faster kit in here before we actually film that video, but we'll be pairing this board with this RAM as well. And the comparison we plan on doing is actually to the i7 12700KF. So, you know, a previous generation high-end gaming CPU. And we're going to upgrade one of our machines to this chip and go ahead and compare the difference between the Ryzen 9 7940HX and the i7 12700KF with a high-end GPU, something like a 4070 Ti Super in, you know, at 1440p gaming, just to compare the experience and try to understand, you know, just how much performance is left on the table at these lower TDPs, right? The max TDP on this board is actually 100 watts listed here on the box, whereas, you know, a 12th generation i7 is going to be able to run above 200 watts in extreme load scenarios. So that'll be a really interesting comparison. I'm excited to do it, and depending on the results, I might turn this board and this chip into my daily driver. So stay tuned for that.